Hi everybody, welcome to episode 20 of the Brownie Knits podcast. I'm your host Gina, aka Brownie Knits. It is the middle of July in 2015 and I thought I'd do a little podcast today. So I don't have a huge amount of things to show you in terms of knitting, even though this is a knitting and crochet podcast. We've been incredibly busy here this summer, and it's really, everything has just gotten away from me. I don't know what happened. We had a week where I had my 5-year-old nephew, and then right on the heels of that, we had visitors on my husband's side of the family that stayed with us. And it took us a little while to recover from that. And then we had the 4th of July, and then the following weekend, this past weekend, we just had a little cookout / get together at our house. So that was a lot of fun, and we're getting ready for more company. So my husband joked the other day that I should put up a B&B calendar online for people to book the guest room, because it's been really busy. So I just haven't had a huge amount of time like I normally do to sit and knit, and what time I have had, I've been doing a lot of design work because I'm working on a hat book to hopefully release later this year, the beginning of next year. So I've just been really concentrating on those things. I have worked on the sweater that I showed you guys in the last 2 podcasts, but it kind of looks the same. Even though I've made a lot of progress, it looks the same. So I didn't want to bore you with that. But fear not, I have some other exciting creative type things to show you today, because I did do some sewing. And then we are going to draw for our mystery giveaway winner. And I'm going to answer a few Ask the Podcaster questions. And those will involve some knitting stuff. So a lot of knitting stuff, actually. So we'll go ahead and get started. Like I mentioned, one of the things that we had since the last time I podcasted was July 4th weekend. And our little town has a they call it Westfield Rocks the 4th, and that's because our high school here are the Shamrocks, so they turned it into Rocks the 4th. And so we have they have like a whole thing set up in our park that's really cute, and they have bands playing and tons of food vendors and things like that. And it's not that far from our house. It's about 1.5 miles. So Patrick and I walk over and listen to the band for a little bit, watch the fireworks, have a lemon shake up and an elephant ear or a funnel cake, it might be known in your part of the world. And then we walk back. And this year when we walked back a little bit before the fireworks show ended. And it was kind of nice because it was just us walking through there, and there were fireflies everywhere. And it was so, I don't know, it was just like summer, just, had the essence of summer. And it reminded me of when I was little and used to go outside and run around in the yard with the fireflies. So that was really fun to do. And we spent a good deal of that day actually getting ready for the next weekend for our cookout / get together with some family members and some friends. So we decided that we were gonna make a cornhole game out of the wood that we had left over from when my husband built our deck on the back of our house. And I had 1 can of spray paint that we could spray paint it with. And then I got online and found the measurements for the bags. So we really only had to buy, I ended up buying beans to put into the bags that you toss. I'm not sure if cornhole is actually a game that everybody in other countries would know. It probably, I think so. You have a wooden board, I guess is the best way to describe it, and it has a hole in it, and then you toss the bags and you're trying to get either on the board or in through the hole, and you get points for you know, how different people do it differently. We did a point if it landed on the board and stayed on the board, and 2 points if it went through the hole. And so Patrick made the wood portion, and then I sewed the bean bags. And I used leftover duck cloth that I had from the inside of some knitting project bags that I had made. So I had this leftover fabric, chevron fabric, and then I had this leftover red fabric. And it just so happened that the spray paint that I had left over from another project was teal. So everything coordinated nicely. It looked like it was all planned, and it wasn't. And what I did for the bean bags, I cut, I believe they were, I want to say I cut 7 by 7 inches, and then you do a half inch seam, so they end up being around 6 by 6. And I did that, you know, just with the wrong sides together. I did the seams and then stitched them closed. After I turned them inside out, I stitched the little area closed here. And we went out and we played an inaugural round on the 4th of July. And I noticed that, especially with this duck cloth, which I found to be a bit thinner than the red, I noticed that it looked like it was starting to pull on the stitches already. So I went back in the night before our cookout, and I actually did a stitch all the way around, like a top stitch, all the way around the outside of all the bags, just for a little reinforcement. So if you're looking to make your own bean bags for cornhole or for another game, these would be really good in the smaller size for like tic-tac-toe games if you were going to do that. You could even just use chalk to do your tic-tac-toe on your sidewalk and then make little bags for the kids to toss. But anyway, yeah, so that was kind of fun that we did together. And so he made the wood portion of it, and I made the little bean bags. I made 4 in each of these colors, and I used a 4-pound bag of beans, dried beans, and put 1 pound in each bag. So they are pretty nice and heavy, maybe a little too heavy because I was very worried about these busting, which is why I went back and did the top stitch. And at the cookout, the wood busted because the legs that were holding it propped up, the screws that we had on hand that Patrick used weren't long enough. So he's just going to have to get some longer screws from the hardware store and just put that back together. But we ended up just propping it up on some other wood that we had. And so everybody had a lot of fun playing cornhole, and we had some really good food and just enjoyed everybody's company. It was really good to see everybody, and I made some of my famous sangria that is really potent. And if you're looking for a good sangria recipe, it had a bottle of red wine, and you can really use any red wine. I found the cheaper the better. And then it had a small bottle of brandy and a small bottle of triple sec, and then I added in about 1/2 cup of sugar after it had already set overnight. So I put all the liquid together and put in 2 oranges, some strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries, and let that set overnight. And then once that was all settled, I added in the sugar and stirred that until it dissolved, and it was delicious, and everybody loved it. So if you're looking for a good sangria recipe. So I made that quick little sewing project, and then back for my birthday, I bought myself a bunch of fabric, and one of the projects that I bought fabric for was to make a rug for underneath the kitchen sink, where we stand for the kitchen sink. And so I decided that it was good motivation with so many people coming over to go ahead and get that done and make that area look a little nicer. And so I sat about doing that one day last week, and here it is. So I chose this fabric motif. I don't know what you would call that. Lattice, maybe? I don't know. And I got it in 5 different colors. So I originally was following a pattern, and then when I started following the pattern, I realized that what they told you to buy wasn't big enough for what they were telling you to cut out. So here's what I ended up doing. I ended up, you need a fat quarter in 5 different colors, and you cut out 35 5.5 by 5.5 squares, and you arrange them 7 long and 5 deep, and then use your quarter. I think I used a 1/4 inch allowance when I did the seams. Then I got to the edge, and she in the pattern made a huge assumption that everybody knew how to quilt, which is probably fine, I think, for her. It was a quilting blog, so that's fair for her to do. But I didn't. So I didn't know, like, what she meant by just putting binding in, like, and I was short on time, and I thought, I'm just going to take this extra red fabric that I bought a yard of and use that for the back, and just do, just with wrong sides together, I sewed the seam. And so it does have 1 panel of fusible fleece inside of it, but I wish I'd done more because it's not as thick as a rug as I would like. But what I did instead to compensate for that, I have the gripper pads underneath it to keep it from moving on the floor, and that gives us some nice cushion. And because I didn't do the binding as she said, and I was a little loose with my seam allowances, my blocks on the edges are more like rectangles than the blocks in the center, which are more square. But that's okay. I'm a beginner sewer, and I just had fun doing it, and I thought that I got my corners to align pretty well, so I was pleased with that. And yeah. So that's the little rug I made for the kitchen, and I have a bunch of leftover pieces that coordinate with that, so I think I'm going to make, maybe some pot holders and towels and things like that to go with it. So that was a fun sewing project, and it didn't take me nearly as long as I thought. When you're a beginning sewer and you see that you have to cut out 35 squares and then sew them together, it sounded kind of overwhelming, but it really didn't take that long. So yeah, that was fun to do, and I'm just gradually, trying new things in terms of sewing, because I'm still just don't consider myself a sewer at all. So anyway, so there were a couple of crafty things that I did manage to squeeze in outside of my time designing and all of the visitors and activities that we've had going on. So those were kind of fun. Then I wanted to answer a few of the Ask the Podcaster questions that we have up on the Brownie Knits Ravelry board. If you're not a member of the Brownie Knits group in Ravelry, please go up and join us. We're a very friendly group. You can chat in any of the threads, and I try to answer absolutely everybody. And earlier this year, we had an Ask the Podcaster thread that was a giveaway, and the giveaway has since closed, but I'm still answering 2 to 3 questions from that thread each episode until they're all answered, and you can still feel free to post a new question if you want, and I'll get to that eventually. So, all right, so we'll answer those, and then we'll announce the mystery giveaway winner that we have this month. So, the first Ask the Podcaster question comes from kwilber, and that is Karen from Massachusetts. And Karen says, I've never knitted socks but would love to. I am nervous to do that hard work and end up with a sock that doesn't fit. I have heard people talk about their go-to sock recipe. How do you develop a sock recipe, and do you have one? So I do have one, and in terms of how you develop one, I think most knitters have just tried different knitting patterns for socks, and then they take a little bit from this one, a little bit from that one, a little bit from that one, to get exactly what they like to knit and how they like it to fit their foot. So my favorite, well, I have a few. The recipes, I have a few that I tend to follow. The first one is a basic recipe of, I personally like to knit my socks cuff down instead of toe up. Some knitters prefer toe up. The nice thing about knitting socks and making sure that they fit is that with either cuff down or toe up, you can try on your socks as they go. So you can kind of be assured a good fit. And I find that I like them to be somewhat snug, a little more than somewhat snug actually, when I'm trying them on, so that then when I block them and wear them, you know, and they stretch out a little bit, they're still snug and they're just, you know, they're not falling down and things like that. So in terms of getting a good fit and being scared to try, I think they're a little bit easier than some other garments because you can try them on and make adjustments as you go. And then the first kind of sock recipe that a lot of or sock pattern that a lot of people do is the cuff down with like a normal rib here, either a 2x2 rib or 1x1 rib. You cast on and you do that for a little bit, and then you knit and stockinette stitch for a little bit usually. And up to that point, it's kind of like a hat. If you think of a hat being with your ribbing and then your stockinette before you do your decreases. So a lot of times when people tell me they're a little bit afraid to start socks, that part is really just like a hat. And then once you get past your heel and all that, it's really like a hat again, because then you've got your hat where you're just knitting and stockinette again, and then you've got some decreases. It's just that you don't have them spiraling around usually. You just have them on a couple sides. So really, you have a couple different ways you can do it. So you can get to down in this section where you have to do a heel flap, a heel turn, and then you pick up along there. Because when you do the heel flap and heel turn, you're just knitting on usually those stitches. So you're going back and forth where you were going in the round. And so then when you get down here, you have to pick up the stitches along that side and then work your gusset. And your gusset is just from where you pick up those stitches and then you decrease back down, so that you typically have the same amount of stitches here as you do here. So that's kind of where a lot of people start making socks, learning kind of this method. And, you know, it can be a little bit freaky to do like that section, but you just kind of have to have blind faith, find a good pattern that a lot of people have done that gets a really high rating, and then follow that, and it'll teach you the basic steps for it, right? And then once you've done it twice, you have a good idea of the concept, and you can go from there. And I find that most people will have this as one of their go-to sock recipes, and they know, oh, I like to knit my socks on such and such size needle, and I like to use a certain number of stitches to do it. And that's because of a combination of how it fits their foot and how tight or loose they knit. So for instance, I probably could knit my socks on a 2 or a 3 and do 56 stitches and it would fit my foot. But I don't like that fabric. So I knit mine on a 1 and I use 64 stitches, and the way that I knit them, it comes out pretty tight and it fits my foot really well. So you kind of have to know your own knitting and your own foot a little bit. So that's one method that I like a lot. My favorite sock pattern, like written sock pattern, is the Hermione's socks. and I just absolutely loved the Eye of Partridge heel, which is a little bit different heel than just a normal flap turn gusset. And I liked the little texture in the traditional stockinette portions. So your foot and then your leg. I liked that texture that it gave you. And they just fit my feet really well. So you could do this one. This would be a great one, and it's very popular. So I like that one. And then, but when I'm just going to cast on a sock, not follow anybody else's instructions at all, and do my own thing, I do 56 stitches on a US 1 needle, and I cast on, not 56, 64 stitches on a US 1 needle. I cast them on up here at the cuff. I do 12 to 18 rows of 2x2 rib, and then I do stockinette until it's about an inch above my bottom of my heel, and then I have the fish lips kiss heel pattern memorized, which you can get in Ravelry for $1, and it's well worth it. She does a great job. I have that memorized. I do my little heel, and then I knit down, and then I do my little decrease for the toe, and I decrease down to usually around 12 or 10. And that's the recipe that I follow the most. So in that one, that one's really simple because you're just doing rib, stockinette, then you have to learn the fish lips kiss heel, and then you're doing stockinette and then a decrease. So you can just, if you did that and made sure that you were knitting your sock tight enough that it grips your foot, then it's not that different from a hat. So that might be something to give a whirl. Okay, I hope that answered your question. And I don't be afraid. You can do it. You can do it. The next question comes from Sally from Idaho, and that is her Ravelry handle and who she is and where she's from. And she says, what is your favorite project you have knit, and why is it your favorite? And I unfortunately don't have it out right now, so I can't show you, but I'm going to try to put up a picture here in the video while I'm talking about it. And it is the Central Park Hoodie by Heather Lodinsky. And this is a very popular sweater pattern. And it has cables all over the sweater, and it has a hoodie on it. So it's just like the perfect fall sweater, and you can definitely wear it into winter. But I really like to wear it in the fall, kind of as a jacket almost. And it probably doesn't fit very well right now because I've gained a little weight. But I've actually thought about knitting it again because I just enjoyed knitting it so much, and I loved how it turned out, and I love wearing it. So I think it is probably my favorite knit that I have done so far. Although a lot of times I will tell people my favorite thing that I've done is usually the thing that I just finished, because I just really get attached to projects as I make them. I don't know if you guys do that. I just feel like they're, you spend so much time with them. I don't know, maybe I'm weird. Well, I know I'm weird, but yeah, so you might check out that pattern if you have not done so yet and you're looking for a sweater to make. I used Cascade 220. I think it was a Heather's, but it might not have been. It was in it's like a denim blue, and it worked out really nicely. I would recommend using a wool for that sweater because you want to be able to block out the cables and make them really pop well. And yeah, so, and I do have it on my project page if you want to go up to my Ravelry page and look there at the Central Park Hoodie in my notebook. Okay, the third question is from Crafty Knitter 7, and that is Sue from Quebec, Canada. And she says, what advice do you have for someone who wants to design for the first time? Do you have a favorite program or tool that you would suggest? So, if you want to design, first of all, go for it. Second of all, take your time. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of designers make, and I know I probably did this in the beginning too, is you get so excited and you just rush to get it out. And a good design really kind of takes time to cook properly. You want to make sure that you take the time to, do the basic things like think carefully about the yarn you're going to use and the properties of it and how you want what you want your garment to do. Do you want it to be really structured? Do you want it to be really flowy? Do you, all of those things are affected by your yarn and your gauge and your yarn content. And then from there, very rarely, I think really experienced designers will just write out something that they have in their head, hand it off to somebody who knits it up, and, boom, they have a design. I don't work that way. And I know a lot of other designers who don't work that way. And I tend to come up with something in my head and I'll do a very rough sketch, like it looks like, those when you were a kid and did stick figures. So I'll do a sketch and then kind of write out what I'm thinking, describing it in words. And then from there, I will cast on a swatch and figure out my gauge with the yarn that I'm thinking about using. And then once I have that figured out, I can do some of the math and map out a little bit of the written pattern instructions in my notebook. And from there, I just start knitting it. And I do a lot of ripping out and redoing it or changing things. And I write everything down. That's one of the biggest things to do. Like, never count on yourself to remember something later on. Make sure that you write it all in your notes so that you can refer back to everything. Sometimes, like, I'm working on a hat right now for the hat book. And I'd say I have 8 pages of notes that are not usable for this hat. But it took that to get to where I'm completely happy with the hat. And I kept all those notes, one, because I, didn't know which iteration was going to be the one that I settled on. And 2, just because it wasn't right for this hat doesn't mean it won't be right for something else in the future. And so I can always go back to my notebook and look and see, and maybe that becomes its own design. The other reason that I say take your time is to make sure that you have an editor and that you get it test knitted. So if you want to save yourself a lot of headaches after a pattern's released, those are the 2 things to make sure that you do before you release it. And you can find a lot of good editors and test knitters out there. They're not the same thing. A test knitter is typically going to, and you have to kind of work out terms with both editors and test knitters, what they're going to do exactly. But a good test knitter, you're going to be able to have them use the yarn that is called for, or a yarn that you're comfortable with them using for your pattern. And they're going to knit or crochet it from your pattern, and they're going to tell you any questions they have along the way. If they come up to something they don't understand, they're going to ask you before they go on. You're just going to find out every little bump in the road that they come across. And sometimes those bumps are something where it's just not as clear as what you thought. And sometimes those bumps are, oh, I put on cast on 80 and it should have been cast on 90. So it could, there are technical things that test knitter can find, as well as just clarifications. And then a technical editor is going to be checking all kinds of things. They're going to be making sure that if you say a yarn is 80% merino wool and 30% something else, they're going to say, no, that's not 100. And, you know, maybe it's not even merino wool. Maybe it's alpaca and you had that wrong. Or they're going to check your math. They're going to check that you have, if you have 5 sizes, do you have 5 spots of stitches everywhere you have different sizes? They're going to make sure that your charts and your written instructions match. They're going to do all those things. And sometimes if it's negotiated into your contract with the editor, they might also be doing some proofreading and copy editing. They're going to make sure things are consistent. Do you, in your abbreviations, say that you're going to abbreviate repeat as RPT, and then you use REP all the way through? You know, just different things like that. So good tech editors and proofreaders and test knitters and crocheters are really, really valuable. And then in terms of programs that I use, I'm a little bit unusual because I have a publishing background and my husband also worked in publishing. I'm very spoiled because I came into pattern designing knowing how to use Word, knowing how to set up Word documents to go into InDesign files. So Word is great for word processing. So when I write my patterns, I chicken scratch out all my patterns in my notebook, and then I have a Word template set up that has everything in order of how I want it to be in my patterns, and they're all styled so that I can type everything in my Word document, and I type everything in my Word document, and then usually if there's time I'll send it to an editor and have them edit it before it goes into InDesign. So like I said, Word's great for word processing. It's not so great for page design. Page design means how your final document's going to look, how your final pattern is going to look. And so I get it as final as possible in Word, and then I send that along with the photography to my husband, and he drops the document into InDesign, into a page layout. He's created master pages of the page layout that I use for all my designs. So for instance, what that means is my border on all my designs is the same color. My font for everything is the same every time. My the space between the heading and the text is the same. Like all of those things are consistent across, or I try to make them as consistent as possible across. So he'll do all of that, and then I'll look at it and do my edit, and then I'll look at it, he'll correct it, and I'll look at it again, and then I send it to an editor again. And that's just my process. That doesn't mean that's how you have to do it, but that's how I do it. I follow very much a book publishing model that I was used to at the publishing house. So after I get all of that done, I tend to then, usually while it's out with the tech editor, I will do another knit. So I do a design sample knit while I'm designing it and taking notes, and then I do a second one after I think it's pretty final. Sometimes it's while it's with the tech editor, sometimes it's after it's been back. But I'll always do a second, sometimes a third. If it's something that I feel like I really want to knit, then I'll do it a fourth. So I'll do several iterations of samples, and then after I think everything is final, I'll have a test knitter work on it. Now there are advantages to having a test knitter go first, and there are advantages to having a tech editor go first. I do a lot of small accessories, so I found for me that I usually have the test knitter go last, but if I'm doing sweaters and things like that, I might have them go first. If it's something a little more complicated, sometimes it's easier for the person actually making it to see something and ask a question than for a tech editor to see it. There are definitely pros and cons to both, so you just kind of have to decide what you're most comfortable with. So those are my kind of rules. If it's a small simple or somewhat simple accessory, then I usually get the editing done first. If it's something more complex, then I usually have the testing done first. Anyway, so I use Word, InDesign, and then Photoshop and Illustrator for any manipulation of photography, and Illustrator if I need a schematic done or something like that. I will often hand draw something out, and my husband will be able to scan that in, and then he can use Illustrator to go over those lines and make it look professional and put in all of the measurements that I want to give and things like that. And then for my charting, I use Knit Visualizer. I don't know. I don't want to get too much into my feelings about chart programs because I haven't found one that does everything I want. But between Knit Visualizer and some manipulation in Illustrator, I can get to where I'm pretty happy. So that's what I use. If anybody out there would like to talk to me more about designing, I just do it from my home and I self-publish. So I'm not claiming to be like a huge designer, but I do it because I like it. So if anybody's interested in talking about it more, I'd love to talk about it. So feel free to send me a message, and I'll be happy to chat along. So, okay. And I think the only other thing I had was to announce our mystery winner. So our mystery giveaway thread is now closed, and the winner, receives a copy of my friend's book. It's See Also Murder, a Marjorie Tremaine mystery by Larry D. Swayze. And you can get it at all great bookstores everywhere. You can also get it digitally. So the winner is going to receive a copy of this, and it is signed. And a little background. When I worked at publishing, one of the jobs that I had, the first job I had in publishing, was as an indexer. So I would read these books and write the index that appears at the back of the books. Now, if those books were certain types of books, you might think that was really an interesting job to have, and it would be. I had to read technical books and do that, so it wasn't the greatest content to read. It was often very dry. And anyway, I met Larry when I was working there, and Larry started freelance indexing. So his main character in the novel is actually an indexer, and so some of it's around that. So yeah, so just a little background, and it's a great book. You should check it out and read it. And the winner's also going to receive this blood red yarn, 4 skeins of Happy Feet from Plymouth, and it has, let me see, 192 yards per skein. So it's enough to do a shawl, a couple pairs of socks maybe, various things. And our winner, I did the random number generator, and our winner is Meg and Belle. And Meg and Belle is Michelle. And Michelle listed her favorite mystery things as reading Hercule Poirot and George Gently. Actually, some of those might be TV. I didn't know if she meant the books or the show. And then also watching Foyle's War. So there you go. And if you haven't checked out that thread and you're looking for some mystery knits, crochets, TV shows, movies, books, you can read through the thread and get some ideas. So Michelle, I will be contacting you to get your information to send you your prize, your giveaway prize. And for the rest of you, I do my podcast giveaways. The winner is announced every 2 months. So our next winner will be announced in the second podcast episode in September. And I am busy putting together that package, but I have a lot of fun putting those together. So you can count on it being something yummy. and I will open a thread. Once I get it all mapped out this week, I'll try to do it this week. Once I get that mapped out, I'll open a thread for you guys to register by commenting on the thread in our Brownie Knits Ravelry group board. So for now, I think that's everything. I hope you guys are all doing well and having a great summer. If you are in the Midwest and you are dealing with a lot of flooding, I hope you're surviving okay. Our state's been hit really hard this summer. We don't typically get nearly this much rain. As a matter of fact, in one day we had as much rain as we would get in the whole month, and it's continued to be heavy downpours, tornado warnings. Yesterday I was supposed to go knit with Christina of A Knitter's Life, and we rescheduled because it was just, you couldn't count on driving in some of it and being able to see. And I'm glad that we rescheduled, because the time that we would have been driving home was absolutely terrible. The winds are crazy insane, and so yeah. So far at my house we've been okay, but you know, lots of thunder and rumbling and heavy rain and all that. So I hope that you guys are all safe wherever you are, and that you're having a great summer. And I promise next time to have more knitting to show you. So, all right, happy knitting and crocheting. Bye-bye.